Let's face it, interviewing sucks and it's also really hard and time consuming. Let's talk about some of the mistakes you might be making that could actually be costing you the interview or setting you back compared to other candidates. Also, I have a Discord server now. Click the link in the description box below to chat with me and others in my community who share similar interests and experiences. I'm excited to continue building my community and I hope that you'll join me over there. Without further ado, let's get started. The first mistake that you're making is that you're talking for way too long. Interviewing should be a delicate back and forth conversation and you shouldn't really be dominating one side of the conversation. Interviewing should be a back and forth process where no individual should be dominating either side of the conversation, yourself included. The more back and forth you are able to include in an interview, the less it starts to feel like a high pressure, judgy situation, and the less it starts to feel like an actual evaluation. Really, I've heard people say that it should just feel like you're catching up with an old coworker, and if you try to keep that frame of reference in mind, then it can also be really helpful to calm yourself down and also de-stress during the interview. Every interviewer should really want the best for you, and all good interviewers will be rooting for you to succeed. Your interviewer really does want to help out, so let them help you out, especially if you've been talking for a long time and you've lost track of the question or you've lost sight of what you're supposed to be answering. No one likes to see anyone else fail, so offer opportunities to let your interviewer help you out and get you back on track if you're feeling a little bit lost. Additionally, if you've been talking for a long time without any pause or any interviewer interjection, then you've also probably introduced tons of nuance into your answer. If your question is on the technical side, then those nuances you've introduced can actually make or break the answer that you've given and clarify if you're actually hitting the mark or if you're starting to stray really far off target. Even if you're non-technical, think about a wall of text. That's pretty hard to follow even just through reading, and so if you just spewed out a wall of text at your interviewer, then it's also probably going to be pretty hard for them to follow. I would always encourage you to do more frequent check-ins than less, such as saying, do you have any feedback or do you have any follow-up questions you'd like to ask after you've been talking for a little bit of a time. I know that when you get nervous though, it's pretty hard to just not babble because you want to fill up the awkward space and the awkward silence, but really silence is good for you. It can emphasize your points, it can help you actually get to the point quicker because you're giving yourself time to think, and finally, it's okay to just be quiet sometimes. Now the second mistake you could be making is that you're not talking enough. I know this feels a little contradictory following the first mistake of talking too much, but I find that people fall on two sides of the spectrum when it comes to being nervous and in high pressure situations. Some people shut down completely and they don't like to talk, and some people overcompensate and talk way too much. If you're on the other end of the spectrum where you tend to shut down or you're just a little bit quiet, let's think about why it can actually be detrimental when you're so quiet. If you give basic two-sentence answers for behavioral questions or tell me about a time questions, it can be hard for an interviewer to judge your personality, the way you responded to something, if you haven't given enough detail or context to how the story unfolds and how the story resolves. It can also just generally be hard to carry a conversation because you've now introduced a lot of awkward fill time that the interviewer has to either spill out more questions for you to answer slowly, or you also have to fill in that time for yourself, which if you tend to be quiet, isn't always the most beneficial situation for either end of the party. Remember that the point of the interview is to get insight into who you are as a person, the way you think, and the way you solve problems. Without actually explaining your answers into more detail, it's hard to actually get that depth and personality, and in that moment, it can just be really hard for an interviewer to actually know whether to pass you or not because they haven't gotten enough detail onto who you are. If you're not talking enough, there aren't enough details about how you solved a problem or how you accomplished something really amazing because that's really what people want to hear, so brag about yourself a little bit. Strike a balance somewhere between these two extremes though. You don't want to be too gregarious, but you also don't want to be quiet as a mouse when it comes to your time to shine. The third mistake that you're probably making is that you're making a lot of unspoken assumptions. Interviewers ask you certain problems with very specific intentions in mind. They want to know how you resolve conflict, they want to know how you problem solve, they want to know exactly what your chain of thinking is when it comes to tackling a hard problem that you've never seen before and even struggle a little bit with. You really want to show that you're working to understand the why behind a problem or the overall underlying foundation of why they're asking this question. And oftentimes, if you make a lot of unspoken assumptions, you can quickly lead yourself down a rabbit hole and also end up actually answering the wrong question. I always err on the side of over-clarifying rather than under-clarifying because the more insight and understanding you get of the problem, the better off your answer is often going to be. By checking in with your interviewer, it's making sure that you're not wasting your time and you're not also wasting the interviewer's time sitting there listening to you answer the wrong question because I'm sure that it's also not great for them either. In particular though, technical questions can be really tricky when it comes to making assumptions. When it comes to product questions for PMs, for example, there are tons of assumptions that go into a question like design a refrigerator. The onus is on you to showcase that you can actually problem solve and eliminate some of these assumptions or clarify them before you make them with your interviewer. When it comes to solving a leak code question, the same pretty much holds true. When it comes to a leak code question though, you don't want to assume that there are edge cases when there may not be, and you also don't want to assume that there aren't edge cases when there could be. It's also always great to clarify just so you can see if the interviewer is expecting you to solve it in a particular way and you're actually going the opposite. The fourth mistake that you might be making is that you're actually jumping to the question way too fast. This kind of also goes hand in hand with the assumptions mistake, but questions are pretty nuanced and there are also a lot of unknowns when it comes to answering basically any question. The name of the game really is just nuance, nuance, nuance. Sometimes it's worth it to ask questions because they really do pay off. They can help eliminate edge cases that you might have been considering that could also be really tricky to solve in the context of that problem, or you can also just not have any edge cases at all in the first place. It also doesn't always have to just be vocal. You can definitely always take time to think quietly to yourself, and that's never a bad thing. Of course, don't overdo it and spend 5 minutes talking to yourself quietly without letting the interviewer know about your thought process. But you can also just take 30 seconds to a minute, write down some things you're thinking, and then walk through that with your interviewer, and that always looks pretty good too. I can't stress this enough though, that asking clarifying questions will get to where you want to go faster. You'll be able to bring the interviewer along with you and be more interactive, again, the whole back and forth thing, and it also will just make your life easier when you start to tackle the harder problems. When it comes to product questions, I think that the biggest feedback I hear is people jumping into the problem way too fast. When it comes to just design a X item kind of question, there are so many hidden assumptions, questions, and underlying whys that you still need to figure out before you can really just start designing. There are questions like what kind of users are you targeting? What kind of features are you working with? Are you building from the ground up? Are you building a completely different item from what we're thinking in the first place, etc. When it comes to software engineering questions, especially designing a system, there are also so many considerations that go into play there that you can just be missing or even not considering if you don't bring those up to the table and with the interviewer first. The last mistake you might be making is that you're not taking advantage of the easy wins. I'll tie this back into specific questions as well because it can be kind of hard to explain what this means without examples. With product questions, you only want to show that you have good product sense and that you're also keeping in touch with users and understanding what your user base wants, as well as developing overall good strategies for sending your product out to the market and getting testing done. You can cover this with easy wins like saying that you're going to do A/B testing and do a quick explanation of what that looks like, or that you're going to dog food your product, which means that you're going to run your product with internal rings first before then shipping it out to external customers. Showing that you're aware of processes like that really just give you a little bit extra credibility, and it also just shows some familiarity and awareness of all the different types of things you could be doing as a PM on that job. Bonus points too if you have a creative solution, because of course that always shows innovative thinking, and especially if it's on the spot. For software engineering or leak code style questions, the interviewer may also have very specific kinds of test cases that they're looking for. This saves you the time of having to come up with edge cases on your own and just coming up with the host of test cases that may take an extra couple minutes for you to come up with. It also just helps to take a little bit of the pressure off too. So those are the big 5 categories of mistakes that I see people making, myself included, when it comes to interviewing. Really dig in deep and see which one of these most applies to you, and create an action plan to start tackling each of your weaknesses. As a reminder, don't forget to join the Discord in the description box below, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of you there. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all again next week for a brand new video. Bye.